Hello, welcome back to Messy Mothering. It has been 3 years since we last spoke with you, so I apologize for that. Life got a little crazy there for a bit, but it has settled down, and I felt led of the Lord to just continue this channel and share an update on what we've been doing. So we're excited to tell you more about trucking and specifically the new things that we've been doing, which is heavy haul. Heavy haul isn't talked about very often. Not a lot of people do it, but the money is there. And so I wanted to share a little bit about that, plus just an update about us. So for those of you that don't know us, we have been in trucking now for 5.5 years. So we're coming up on our 6th year of trucking. What that means for us is that we are a lot farther along than a couple years ago when you saw us, and a lot farther along than when we started. It's been a blessing. Trucking there's no doubt about it. It's a blessing to our family. It's a blessing from the Lord. We get to be our own bosses. We get to make our own schedule. We don't have to ask for time off or for vacations or sick days. I mean, we do all that ourselves. It comes at a cost, but we find it to be well worth it. So, since you last saw us, we have added a child, our baby Noah. He is the love of our life, along with our now 3.5-year-old Annabelle. So our kids are just a joy and a blessing to us, and they've just been just a joy. So we've had that as a blessing, and with that came some challenges. It's a different experience to give birth when your husband could be anywhere across the country. And so I can talk more about that if anyone has questions, but we have managed both times to have him here for the whole experience. And it's just been a blessing. The Lord has blessed us. So since you last saw us, we've changed companies that we contract with. So we are owner operators. We own our own truck, and we just contract with companies for their freight and for their DOT number. Our plan is to get our own DOT number by the end of the year and be out on our own authority. But for now, we still contract. And that's been a blessing, because with heavy haul, you can't start on your own authority pulling oversized and overweight things. You have to work up to it. And so we've been able to have that experience by contracting with people. So we've contracted with Landstar for a bit. Their rules are very strict about how fast you can grow. In oversized, they want you to put in a couple of years before you can get to the big boy stuff. And my husband just felt like he could move faster than that, and he had more ability than that. And so we left Landstar, which was a huge decision. As most people in the industry know, Landstar is the creme de la creme of owner-operator contracting because of the amount of freight they have, the quality of the freight, the quality of the rates. And so it was a big deal to leave and to make that decision, but it was a good decision. So because we left, he's been able to do so much heavier things so much quicker. And if we were to ever go back, which I don't think we would, he would be able to re-enter as a brand new class, probably 3 steps above where he started. So in a very short amount of time. But I wanted to answer some questions, because I know that oversized can kind of seem daunting to people, and heavy haul can kind of feel like, gosh, is it worth the investment? Because it's an investment. Short answer is yes. It has been well worth the cost. Rates have been dropping, as most of you know, in the area, in the industry. Both open deck and van and reefer, everything has dropped, which doesn't make a ton of sense to me, because fuel has gone up, but the market's overinflated because everyone got into trucking a few years ago with COVID, and the rates were hot and market was hot, and now we've got more drivers than loads. So it's got to recalibrate, but it will. And I think in the meantime, we're in a really steady place. And so I highly recommend it. With the rates dropping, we made the move to heavy haul just in time, because had we not moved, we would have been making $1.90, $2 a mile just in open deck. So when you saw us, we were doing flatbed. Since you saw us, we moved to step deck. We did a triaxle step deck, and then we finally moved to RGN. That's where the money was, especially for us. And I will say, if you're in flatbed and you're like, I'm not sure I want to do heavy haul yet, but I want to make more than flatbed's making, go step deck, because step deck's going to have more freight. It's going to have better rates, and maybe not more freight, but it's going to have better rates. And honestly, it's easier from what my husband tells me. He, especially if you get a step deck with load locks, you can go to the ports and just pick up containers, and you've got load locks on there, and you're hardly breaking a sweat. I mean, he would come home from picking up a port load with load locks and he just wouldn't even be dirty. So it's a blessing. So I would highly recommend step deck if you're itching in flatbed but you're not ready to do heavy haul yet. Some of the things you have to keep in mind with heavy haul is equipment. So when we got into it, we had to add lights to the front and back. We had to add oversized banners and flags and have all that stuff. He just actually, because he's doing heavier than he was because he got enough permits stacked up, he just is having to add extendable mirrors because it's so wide. He can go wider than 12 feet now, which, if you don't know, if you go wider than 12 feet, that's wider than the lane itself. So you're going to have pilot cars for that kind of thing. He's driven with pilot cars once or twice because of certain states' regulations, but not for a whole load. So now that he's cleared for that, that's going to be a whole nother ball game. So I'll definitely update you if you guys want to know more about that. Something else to keep in mind with oversize is permits, especially as a spouse being at home. That was something that affected me more than anything else he's done, is that he had to be permitted. And if you don't know, if you're on a permitted load, you're no longer getting that 11, 15 hours that you were getting. You don't get to run the whole day, especially in the winter. We started doing all this stuff in the winter. And so you don't get to run the whole 11 hours because there's not 11 hours of daylight. And some states have different requirements. So if you're running through Texas, you could have a much more lenient set of rules than if you're running through Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, if you don't know, does not really like trucks coming through their state at all if they're legal. So when they're oversized or overweight, especially in the winter, especially with bad weather, they'll just shut the state down to you and say you can't come in. And when they're sitting on a load, wives and or husbands at home, whoever you are, and he says, hey, I got a load, I'm coming home, ask him, did you get your permits? Because he could be sitting in Nebraska, but not have all the permits to get home. So he could get stuck somewhere along that route and say, I don't have my permit yet for, I'm not great at geography, but Kentucky, let's say, if he was running through there. And you're sitting there waiting on him. And he's like, I'm at the border, I've got hours to run, I got daylight to run, and I can't move because I'm not permitted to leave the state line yet. So that's something you have to be on top of. And we found that even sometimes we have to be on top of office administrators and brokers. We have to be on top of the dispatchers and the people in the office and say, hey, did this permit come in? Because most companies will have it automatically sent to you when they get it, and sometimes they won't. And sometimes someone forgot to put in the permit request in the first place because they were trying to get home to their kids on a Friday and they didn't do it, and they not doing their job cost you a day down or more. So just in general, I find a lot of truck drivers have never worked in an office, and I have quite a bit. And I'll tell you that you have to be on top of them, especially about this stuff. When they have a step to do, and it's you and your money, and they have a step to do in between, especially with the trips and getting to run like this, I would clarify a couple of times. Did you send these in? Is this done? When can I expect this back? And you may get some pushback because sometimes people in the office are rude to truck drivers. They think you don't have a brain. It's not true. It's a lie. It's a lie from the devil, to be honest with you, but it's just meant to cause division, and there doesn't have to be any. You're on the same team. So do it nicely, do it with respect, to say, hey, I just wanted to make sure because I need to get home, or I want to get this load dropped so I can get another one. Did this get in? I haven't seen it yet. Can you check on it for me? Do it nicely, do it with respect. Say, I hope I'm not taking too much of your time. I'd really appreciate it. When you speak their language, and keep things at the top of their brain, because with people in the office, remember, the squeakiest wheel gets the grease. So don't worry about being a pest as long as you're kind. They're going to be okay. But get it done. and make sure they're getting it done. Because I know that my husband had never worked in an office. He'd always done other jobs other than that before trucking. And so he didn't realize that they could just be sitting there not doing a task you needed them to do because they got distracted, they had a meeting, something else came up, somebody was sick. And I'm like, no, they're not thinking about your load at all. You're thinking about your load. You're the only one that cares about your load like you care about it, because it's your load, it's your money, it's your time at home, if you're headed home, whatever it is. So you have to be on top of them. And I wasn't planning to get into that, but it's a good point. So with permanent loads, make sure that they've sent them in, make sure you're getting them back, and really, really watch, because each state is going to be different. Each state's gonna have different rules. I wish it was just federally the same across the board. I feel like it should be, but each state has its own set of geography, its own set of construction and all that stuff. And so if you're on, let's say, an over height load, you could be sitting for 2 or 3 weeks, because what they have to do is they have to say, okay, this over height load wants to come in the state. They have to go along the entire route they're planning to send you and send a crew out to make sure there's no lines that are too low, because if they send you out and you follow their route and you hit a line, that's not your fault. And while most things in trucking land on the driver anyway, they do take that pretty seriously, and they know they permitted you to go on that road. You have written documentation, you did the right thing. So if you hit a line, that's on them. Do you know what I mean? So you have to be very patient. I know some guys, especially because over height loads, they pay a lot. So I know some guys will get loaded and just fly home and fly back to the truck when all their permits come in. So just keep that in mind. That's down the line. If you haven't even started heavy haul yet, you're not going to do that right away. More than likely, depending on the company. Most companies are good stewards of that, but just keep that in mind. The last thing that I've noticed about the difference in heavy haul is the difference in clients. So for those of you that don't know, I used to run on the road too. I used to drive with my husband. When we got pregnant with our first child, we had been on the road for 2 years together, doing flatbed and van actually. And I loved it. I loved being out there. We had our Great Dane and us, and we just went for the first couple years of our marriage, and it was a great time. You will learn a lot about other people's marriages when you tell them that you spend 24/7 with your spouse on a truck, because they will either say, "Oh, that's awesome," or they'll say, "Ugh, I could never." So you learn about other people when you tell them that. So I used to do that. So I interacted with all the clients, all the people at the truck stops, everybody that he interacted with, I saw too. And what I saw, I was shocked by. People were terribly rude. They were terribly mean. I didn't understand it. It didn't make sense to me why people were treating them like dirt. I mean, you have to go to school for a little bit for this. You have to have a lot of training to do it well, and to have your own truck. And so to like come into a port or a customer and them treat you like dirt under their shoe, I just didn't understand it. You're performing a service, and if you don't do your job, they don't have any of the things that they need. They can't run their factory without you showing up to deliver their equipment, or, you know, whatever it is, their farm or their store, whatever it is. So I never understood being rude like that, but I know people are. And the one thing that I'll say about oversize, because I asked my husband about this, I said, are people nicer? Because, you know, you're going to these one-off customers. Most customers don't need constant, I mean, unless it's like a John Deere plan or something, but the receivers themselves, I mean, they treat you with respect because you have to do a lot more work. They understand that it takes some brain cells to do what you're doing. Most people don't realize it takes brain cells to drive a truck in general, but whatever. But they seem to, I said, do they respect you more? I mean, do they treat you kinder? And he said, you know, they really do. They really are nicer in oversize. They really do seem to have a level of professionalism that, you know, everyone should have with you, but they don't. But they seem to have that level of professionalism that they should have in the first place. So if that's something that's bothering you on the road and that's something that's like irking you, I would suggest heavy haul before you quit, or before, you know, you just deal with it forever, because a lot of the time they will be kinder to you and treat you as the professional that you are. So keep that in mind. And he said it's also easier. I mean, he's like, I don't dock ever. I'm pretty sure my husband might be the worst backer. I mean, he does park. He's not a bad backer, to be clear, but he could be with the lack of times he has to do it. he doesn't have to dock. He doesn't have to blindside enter most of the time. I mean, he just pulls up, they load it, normally with a crane. They have to make crane appointments. Sometimes they have to he carries really big tractors that have these huge tires on them. And so sometimes they'll have to drive the tractor onto the trailer, take off the tires, and he drives it across the country or wherever it's going. And then the receiver has to schedule tire guys to put the tires back on. And I know some of you drivers are like, I know this, I don't know why you're explaining it. But a lot of wives watch this channel, and so I want to explain, like, this is what they're doing when they get there. I think it's really cool. And then also another perk with oversized, so if you're normally in open deck and you're not in oversized yet, I will tell you, most of them don't need a tarp. He carries his 12-foot tarps around, 11-foot tarps, I don't remember which one. He carries them in case of a good load, but my husband hasn't touched a tarp in 3 months, not at all. And he could not be more thrilled about that, especially in the winter, because when we did flatbed, I mean, every single load from September to April was tarped. So to get that reprieve is a perk of moving up in your career. So if that's something that entices you, I would say do that as well. So just stuff to keep in mind, just an update on us, and we've got more coming. So if you have any other questions about trucking or being a spouse at home with trucking, just let me know. So thank you so much for watching Messy Mothering, and we'll see you next time. Bye.